Hi guys, how's it going? We are back. Welcome to our very first Azure Functions community stand-up. This is our very first live stream in 2023. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Melony. I'm here with Eamon and Shreya. We're from Azure Functions product team. In case you don't know, we are meet you here every third Tuesday at 10 a.m. each month. And today, in our February audition, we're going to talk about what's new in Azure Functions. Hi, Eamon. Would you like to tell us more about our Azure Functions product team?
Definitely, Melody. Hey, everyone. Thanks again for joining. Really awesome to have you come hear about what we're doing with Azure Functions. Hopefully get your feedback, your comments, make it as engaging as possible. We'd love to hear, some of the things you're working on. Maybe we can showcase those in the future. But really just love having you involved in Azure Functions, giving us feedback, and really trying to help us, make the product better over time. As Melly mentioned, my name's Eamon O'Reilly. I'm a product manager on the Azure Functions team. And I'm with Shreya, who's also a product manager on the team. And Shreya, maybe you can talk a little bit about your area, what you work on as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. And I work on Python and triggers and bindings. And today I'll be going deeper into some of the new things we have coming up for Python.
Awesome. That's really good. So I think the first thing we were going to talk about was kind of just give some background into what are all the great things that have been going on in Azure Functions, get everyone caught up to speed since it's our first community one for a long time, but particularly the first time in 2023. So I think maybe we'll go to the next slide and talk a little bit about some of the new things that have happened in Azure Functions over the last few months. So hopefully everyone can see the slide, but what we did was we kind of looked back over the last few months, basically since fall of last year, and kind of went through all the kind of changes, improvements, features we've released. A lot of this is based on, a lot of feedback you guys have given us. We've heard from customers, we've heard working with the community, and trying to kind of build out the right experience, the right capabilities for you to kind of build your serverless applications using Azure Functions. And so we broke it into a kind of a few areas. As you know, Azure Functions is a broad product that gives you the ability to kind of build all kinds of event-driven architecture. But a lot of the areas we focus on, we called out here, but there's a bunch more as well that we do to kind of ensure the platform stands up to kind of the high capabilities we expect of the platform. The first one that we spent a lot of time on, as you know, is .NET. And .NET is definitely the biggest language we have inside of Azure Functions. We have a great community of .NET developers. We get a lot of feedback on how to make .NET better, how to make .NET and Azure Functions better. And one of the things we've been working on over the last few months was obviously to bring the latest versions of .NET to the community and to our customers. So last November, I think we released .NET 7. support. And so this allows you to use the latest capabilities of .NET inside of Azure Functions. And we also brought a new capability, which was to run .NET Framework 4.8 in an isolated worker as well. And one of the benefits of that is, if sometimes Azure Functions has been around for a lot of years. And so we've had some customers using the full framework for their applications. Obviously, the amount of a need for that is reducing over time because most customers have moved to .NET Core, but some customers still require .NET Framework, but they were stuck on an old version of our runtime. And so moving it to our latest runtime, but moving it into an isolated worker allows those customers to move forward, gain some benefits of our overall platform, but still be able to use the .NET Framework if they need to. One of the other things we've been investing in .NET is we really want customers to be able to use the isolated worker going forward because it opens up a lot of new capabilities for customers. But obviously, we want to be able to make sure that the in-process capabilities that customers use today are also available in our isolated worker. So one of the big asks we've had from customers is the ability to basically have rich SDK type bindings available. And so we have a public preview out that supports blob triggers now today. And this is really kind of setting the groundwork to allow you to get that rich, full object that you can work against when you're doing your SDK development using our programming model inside of the .NET isolated worker. So a lot of activity happening there, a lot of activity happening in .NET in general, including bringing the full monitoring with application insights into the isolated worker. So I think this is a theme you'll hear over the next few months, is us really trying to make sure that that isolated worker meets all of your needs when you're building .NET applications, and adds a bunch more capabilities that just aren't possible today when you're running in process. The next big area that the team has been working on is durable functions. And so when you think about durable functions, it really does allow you to do these complex state management workflows inside of Azure Functions. Typically the serverless capabilities we have in Azure Functions allow you to run small functions that execute and then go away. But we've seen over the years that a lot of applications need some kind of state management, the ability to do fan in, fan out, entities, all these kind of capabilities you often need when you're building a complex application are available through durable functions. But one of the things we've added is the ability for you to run these on different backends now as well. So if you really have high throughput scenarios, you no longer have to require Azure Storage to maintain that state. You can bring in our backend Netherite, which is built on Event Hubs and Azure Files, or you could even use Microsoft SQL as backend state storage for your durable functions. So it gives a lot more flexibility for high throughput scenarios, as well as if you want to run durable outside of Azure and run it anywhere that MS SQL is available. A couple of other things we did in durable was, obviously, this .NET isolated worker theme persists, and we brought durable capabilities to .NET in isolated processes. As well, we brought Java durable functions available. So this really kind of makes sure that no matter what language you want to build inside of Azure Functions, you can take advantage of all of the core capabilities, including all the durable scenarios when you're building. The other two, or a few other big areas that we've been investing in, is triggers and bindings. So as you know, the triggers and bindings really allow you to get that rich programming model that Azure Functions has invested in, and that's what we see a lot of our customers give great feedback on. And it's really the ability for you to not have to think about the plumbing of how I tie into all these event-based systems. What you really want to do is get the event, write your business logic on it, and then send that event on for further processing. And that's really where the functions programming model lives. And so there's a few things we did along the way over the last few months. So one was get the extensions v4, bundle out. So what this really means is that you're on the latest versions of the underlying Azure SDKs. And so all of the performance improvements, all the bug fixes, and new capabilities that those underlying SDKs now are available through our extensions inside of Azure Functions as well. But not only are we kind of making sure we keep up to date on all of the existing ones, we're adding new trigger support as well for a lot of new customer scenarios that we've heard about over the last year or so. And one of those was SQL, by far one of the biggest kind of data stores we have inside of Azure. And a lot of customers want to be able to trigger based on changes that are happening inside their SQL databases to be able to run some business logic on top of that. And so we just released the Azure SQL trigger in public preview that allows you now to listen to those events happening in SQL and then take action automatically using Azure Functions. And then the last kind of big one we did in the triggers and binding was we added Cosmos DB support for the Cosmos DB SDK v3. And so what that allows you to do, there was a lot of improvements, a lot of changes that happened in Cosmos over the last few months. And so we brought those in and made those available for you as well when you're using our programming model. On the Java side, we have a lot of our customers not just using .NET and PowerShell and Python and Node. There's a lot of our customers that need Java as well. And it's oftentimes they're writing brand new applications using Java. They have a lot of history in Java, a lot of knowledge that they want to be able to bring forward. And so one of our goals is to always kind of have that first-class experience inside of Functions using the latest Java technologies that are available. And so I mentioned earlier about durable functions coming into for Java, but also we want to make sure the languages are always up to date. So we just recently released Java 17 GA, so you can use Java 17. There's a lot of work we're doing to try to make the monitoring and application insights really great inside of Azure Functions. As hopefully most of you that use Functions know that this kind of deep integration we've done with application insights, gives you that rich monitoring experience. And I think it's very important. I think a lot of when we talk to customers and talk to you guys in the community, one of the challenges that comes up with Functions is because of its distributed nature, because of its event-driven architecture, it's sometimes difficult to actually trace through what's happening in your application, what's going wrong, where are my events going. And so one of the things we've done a lot of work over the last few years was to integrate distributed tracing throughout your Azure Functions. And then obviously, the last thing we supported was if customers are familiar with .NET dependency injection, we've also added that into Java. That gives you a lot of flexibility to kind of do some additional unit testing, insert your own functions as needed into the runtime. The last couple of areas I'll just talk for a moment on was JavaScript. And so JavaScript, obviously very popular language inside of Azure Functions, a huge community out there. And again, one of the things we've done recently was to make sure we try to keep up to date on all of the latest languages and improvements that are coming out in Node. And so we just recently supported GA of Node 18 inside of Azure Functions as well. So hopefully you guys can try that out, make sure it's working well for you, and just kind of the overall JavaScript experience is first class throughout the platform. And then the last area I'll just mention, and I won't spend too much time on it because Shreya, who really works on this area, is going to go deeper into it for us. And there's a lot of exciting things happening in Python. But one of the things, obviously, just like we do for Node and PowerShell and .NET and Java, is to keep up to date with the latest languages, because you want to take advantage of those languages, all the new features they have, but you want to take advantage of inside of the programming model that Functions has and in the event-driven serverless architecture we offer inside of Azure. So we released 3.10 GA support, then working obviously on 3.11 as it comes out. And the other area that we're going to focus on now for the rest of this discussion is on the V2 programming model. And this is kind of an exciting area, mostly driven by feedback from the community and customers of how do we even make Python even more familiar, more awesome inside of the platform. And that's something that we're spending a lot of our time across all our languages to try to first class those experiences into Azure Functions for your local dev experience, all the way through your end-to-end lifecycle management. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Shreya, who joined us just for this area, and be able to kind of walk you through what we're doing there, some of the reasons behind it, and also what that experience is that you could try out today. So
before
Shreya.
getting to that, we are excited about all the updates we've been doing over the last 6 months. And I can see actually in the chat, we have a lot of questions coming from the community. And I thanks Eamon for such a good recap for everything we've been doing here. And I think the most question from the audience, they asking for Azure SQL Trigger. And so they want to know if that's working in isolated worker now, and how long until GA for SQL triggers.
Yeah, I know the team has been working on to get it in the isolated. I'll have to check if it is available. Maybe somebody will know from the PM side. But on the GA, I think we're targeting to have that out basically later this spring, early summer, to have the GA. And one of the main things we want with SQL is to try it out, make sure that we have all the capabilities built in you're looking for. And then if there's any feedback, we want to incorporate that from the public preview to GA. But most of the capabilities should be there for what you need now. So if there's something missing, definitely, open up an issue. As you know, Azure Functions and all of our extensions are open source up on GitHub. And so if there is something missing, you can go to GitHub, open up an issue, and it allows the team to kind of prioritize those, make sure they're addressed before we get into GA and beyond.
Yeah, I can see also have someone said, Python 3.10 in GA Azure Functions. This is a great news. And I believe the community also want to know more about the custom binding. Because for migrating to the custom ones, we have actually provided a lot of different bindings and triggers. Some of them are very interesting, but people want to know if we're gonna expand that to have more samples working with isolated C#, because this is the most developers coming from. Are there any instructions for our straightforward examples of an input binding for isolated C#?
Yeah, so I know you spent a lot of time on the .NET. There is some good examples up in the documentation on how to move from an improc to an isolated, including some examples on the input binding. I think the biggest thing you're probably asking about is this SDK type binding work that we're offering. Because if you're familiar with improc, when you're doing not just your triggers, but the input bindings associated with those, you often want to work with a richer input object so that you can call methods on it, you can do additional tasks. And that's what the SDK type binding is offering. So there will be a lot more content and samples coming out shortly, because we just announced that capability, and we're just starting with blob triggers and then extending across all of the other triggers over the next few months as we kind of get ready for full release of the SDK type binding. But hopefully that's the area you're looking for, and that's one of the focuses we have over the next few months.
Yeah, I can see a lot of passion from the community, a lot of interest here, and we have for Python. I think we do have a new programming model. As we know, Azure Functions will be improving the developer experience with a lot of work we've been doing. Especially, we want to also grow some other languages apart from C Sharp because our community is our source of energy. So I would hand over to Shreya so you can talk about more about a V2 programming model for Python and share more experiences, what it's gonna be, as well as use cases.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melanie, and thanks, Eamon, as well. And kind of building on what you all had said, I want to mention that this programming model is really a result of the feedback we've gotten from the community, specifically the Python community, on how they want to see more Python principles within functions, how that gap from learning functions to just being a Python native developer, it can be minimized. And that's really our goal here with this new programming model. I also want to call out that as the programming model is changing, it really alludes to the exterior of the function, so kind of the files that are included, the code that's written, but the core aspect of the function app, the way the function works, is going to remain the same. So the programming model really just alludes to what you're writing and the typing and things like that, and not necessarily the inner workings of the programming model itself. So a few different themes that we've taken into account here for this programming model. First is the simplified folder structure. So if you're familiar with the V1 programming model, the current default way to use Python in functions, we actually provide a folder for each new function within a function app that's created. And in this folder, there's a few different files, including a function.json file. With the new programming model, we've simplified and flattened this folder structure. So now we no longer require a new folder or even a new file for a new function in a function app. Rather, you just have one file, and we're calling it function app.py. And inside of that file remains the code for all your functions. So we've eliminated that function.json file just like we've had in .NET isolated as well. The next cool thing that we've introduced with decorators, for replacing triggers and bindings. So as I mentioned, that function.json is now eliminated, and that's going to be replaced with defining triggers and bindings as decorators. So this is to make the programming model more akin to a native Python developer, and of course, write the same type of thing that we were doing before in much fewer lines of code across fewer files as well. And the last one, which is my favorite to talk about, is easier to access documentation. So as you know, there are lots of docs online that we published for developing in Python and other languages as well for Azure Functions. But with this new model, we're also introducing in-editor documentation. So if you're using VS Code, you can actually refer to the docs within VS Code and get helpful links and code snippets and things like that without ever leaving the editor. And if you have IntelliSense, you can also use that to be able to get helpful hints just as you develop code. So with that, I do want to demo a little bit about what this programming model is all about, how you can get started today as well. So as you can see here, this is just the entry point. You'll select the Python programming V2 model, and this is just if you're creating a new project, a new function app locally on VS Code. And I want to kind of walk you through what it looks like when you first go through this process, and then share another example as well of how you can extend the programming model currently and get started today. So as you can see on the left, we have all these different files that are created for you. And as I mentioned, there's that function app.py file, and that's going to be the only file required for you to put your functions inside. As I mentioned before, if you are familiar with the V1 model, that would be across many different folders and files if you have more functions. But in this case, it's just going to be this Python file. And you are welcome to create more files if you'd like to organize your functions in a different way. But function app.py is all that's really required in this scenario. So as we start, you can also see some of the other files are going to be the same, such as local settings.json. So the first thing I want to do once I've created a project is update the storage settings in my local settings.json file. So if you have a connection string to a storage account that already exists, or you're interested in creating a storage account because you're going to bind to a storage account, then that isn't one option. Another option, which is also really easy, is using a local storage emulator. So in this case, I'm just using Azure, and as you can see, I've just placed the connection string as the replacement over there. And then I'm looking now at the code that was automatically generated for me. So in function app.py, currently we have a sample HTTP trigger that you can just get started with. So you can go ahead and actually just uncomment this code, and then we can go ahead and run it as well. So as you can see, we are going ahead and saying funcos start. And with this process, we're using 3.10 as well, which, as mentioned, it has just been released to GA within functions. And as you can see, with very little setup, mostly just going through this workflow, we've been able to run an Azure function in the new programming model. So definitely would recommend, if you have the chance, if you're interested in learning more, just to try out this simple workflow. It doesn't require any specific function creation or anything like that, just creating the application itself. And then the next thing I really want to showcase is what it looks like when you try to create a new function within this function app, and also kind of show you all what I was talking about when I mentioned the easy to access documentation. So as you can see, I'm going through and trying to figure out, which trigger I'm interested in, or which binding I'm interested in. And then I'm going to go ahead and select a location for the function. So we have three options here, which is a new addition to the V2 programming model. The first option is to append to the selected file. So this is if I wanted to have another Python file where we're storing functions, I could choose to append the template code there. The recommended option is to append to function app.py, which is this main file that we've been walking through. And the last option is actually the option to preview the template. So previewing the template won't impact anything that you're working on currently. Rather, it'll open a new tab within VS Code, as you can see here. And you can see there's some documentation, there's also code snippets, and this is all in the editor. And you can also get a brief description on really why we're doing the programming model V2 and more information about it, and links to other documentation where you can go further. So I feel this is a great way if you're not sure, if you're not ready to append that code, if you're not ready to commit to creating another function, you can always go ahead and preview, and you can learn more just without having to go to another window or try and find any additional information. And the next cool thing is also with IntelliSense. So as you can see, I've set up a decorator for myself, and I'm just typing in the word trigger because I'm not sure what trigger exists or what output bindings exist. And as you can see, there's a few different options of what is available. And then you can also see there's helpful documentation that guides me in what is required, what needs to be written. So this is just, a simple example of kind of what it looks like to use the V2 programming model today. And I really hope that if you have the chance, you can go and try it out and give us feedback. Like Eamon mentioned, we are all open source. So if you create an issue in the Python worker repository, we would be so excited to hear any of your feedback that you might have for this programming model. And before I end, I also want to share actually just one more example. So if you are already a Python developer and you have maybe a Flask or a Fast API app that you already have, you can actually bring it to functions really easily. And with this new programming model, I just want to show you like really how simple it is to bring that code into functions. So here you can see I have this sample Flask app, and it's just a simple Hello World app. And all I've done is I've moved it to my repository where I have my function app. So with all these other files, I've just added this sample Flask app. And this, again, could be any code that you have that you can add here. And after doing that, I'm just adding a small snippet into my host.json file that includes the root prefix addition. So after adding this, I can just go to my function app.py file, and just in one line of code, I can go ahead and reference this WSGI function app that exists in this repository and add the code necessary to be able to just run this app within Functions. And I think it's really cool because it's really easy, as you can see. Even if I'm not familiar, I'm getting all of these helpful hints as I go on what needs to be included. And we have good documentation on this as well, but ultimately it is just one line of code that you're adding to this function app.py file. So it's an easy way to get started with functions and do something cool if you already have existing code as well. And that's kind of all I have for you today, is really just these two straightforward examples, but really hope that you all try out the V2 programming model, and we'd love to hear your feedback again. So thank you so much, and I'll just let this code run once so we can also see what it looks like. But yeah, it's just a simple app, so we're just seeing the execution go through. Awesome. Thank you. I'll give it back to you, Melony.
Oh, thanks, Shreya. Actually, I can see we have a little party going on in our chat. And someone also in the community was asking about the cloud region rollout. Probably we can also talk about more what we've been investing in the infrastructure side. We have new cloud regions rolling out, which are already available on Azure portal. Eamon, would you like to talk about a little more about this?
Sorry, did you ask about the region rollout, Melanie? Is that what someone was asking? Yeah, so I think one of the things, as most of you know, there's kind of there's lots of different hosting capabilities. There's kind of three major ones we offer in Functions, which is consumption-based, premium, and app service-based. And then those have different region support. Our overall goal is to be available in every region where Microsoft Azure has a presence. And I think if you look across what we've been doing over the last few months and a year, is we're trying to make sure, if you're trying to build your application and you have region-specific requirements, maybe you can't have your data leave that region, then we have been rolling out into as many places as possible. You can track that up on the Azure Regions website. That gives you all of the different regions available, as well as you track our Azure Update notifications. You can see when we add more regions inside of there. And if there are additional ones that you're looking for, you could go probably to our Azure Functions host and request them up there. Might be one place to give us feedback if there's a region you're interested in that Azure Functions isn't available yet.
Thanks, Eamon. We do have some questions in the chat, but I think already resolved by chatting with them. I also shared some examples for input banding for isolated worker, as well as our GitHub repo. I hope for our community this is going to be useful. And we do have a little time, but I'll see if we have any other questions pops up. But before getting to that, probably have a personal question for Shreya about the Python new programming model. What do you like the most?
Oh, thanks for asking. I think the documentation edition is one of my favorite features for sure, because it just makes it so much easier to develop code, and it makes it easy for people who are new to get started, but also existing customers. It's very easy to now follow along this new way of developing.
That's awesome. Speaking of documentation, we actually also prepare some resources for the community. So if you navigate to the slide, the last one, number 14, basically we have a very nice start point for other developers. If you didn't start to use the Azure Functions, basically you can go to aka.ms Azure Func Jumpstart. That is an overview article where we putting together all the scenarios, and we're gonna also update that article so you can find out the major scenarios for the functions. And from there, you'll be also find out all the samples and as well how to get started on Azure Functions. Also, I know a lot of developers, especially for C# developers, we've been doing a lot of investment over the last few years for .NET. So if you still have Azure Functions app on v3 host, we do have a migration guide here. It's in a short link called aka.ms v3af.net migration, which gives us a very detailed step-by-step guidance to help you migrate to v4 host, to help you take advantage of the greatest and the newest feature of Azure Functions as well as .NET. So be sure to check that out. When I check out the chat, I don't see any other questions. Of course, before we wrapping up, Please feel free to leave your questions or what you want to hear from us in the comments down below, even after stream's finished. Also, as I mentioned in the beginning of our live stream, we are here every month, every third Tuesday at 10 a.m. So be sure go back and connect with us. And if you have any questions in the comments and the content you want to hear from us for the next time, please feel free to leave that. And also feel free to create issues or any feedback, on our Donate Accelerate GitHub repo. And for some other languages, we also have separated GitHub repo as well. With that in mind, I think that's everything we have for today. Any last thoughts for Eamon and Shreya I want to share with the community before we wrapping up?
No, I think you covered it, Melony. That was awesome. I really appreciate people joining, giving us feedback, engaging, just asking questions. We're going to be here every month, so hopefully, we'll build up the community. We'll start to answer your questions. Any other topics you want to get covered, we can start adding those in. But it's just great to see the engagement and hopefully learn a lot from you over the next few months and years. So thanks again.
Thanks, Evan. Shreya, do you have anything you want to add?
Nope. Thanks so much, Melony. Just that I hope everyone tries out the new model if you haven't already and gives us feedback.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. On that note, we'll see you guys in the next one, which is next month, third Tuesday. See you.
Bye.